Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show. I just got back from a 4-day weekend on a retreat in California. Now, it wasn't a retreat focused on innovation in the classical sense. The retreat was one that was hosted by a woman who has trained more than 25,000 senior executives over the last 40 years. Her name is Martha Borst, and she lives on a windy road in the middle of nowhere in the Napa Valley. And me and 17 other individuals got together to take a course called Self-Mastery. I felt like I was already the master of my domain, but there are always places where we can improve on ourselves. And I decided I wanted to innovate a little bit from the inside out. And so the conversation that I was having with myself over this 4-day, very intensive, 12-hour-a-day workshop was about dignity and integrity and holding on to the things that matter most to us in our personal, our business, and our business relationships, certainly, but also with ourselves. And I came away from that weekend asking myself, what is the greatest impact that I could have to my business over the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years time? And as I looked at my business and looked at the holes of what I was finding in it, what I was missing was this sense of personal fidelity to my commitments, to my desire to do the things that I really wanted to do, my integrity, my dignity, my desire to just say, I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do every time that I do it. And so sometimes I think about innovation as these big, grandiose things that we start implementing or changing, new technologies that we're adopting. But I realized for me, the technology that I needed to adopt first was a commitment to the agreements that I was making so that every new thing could prosper. And so I just want to throw it out to my audiences too. What is the one thing that you are working on that you think is foundational to what you're doing today in order to do the things you really want to do tomorrow? And that's why I wanted to invite you also to meet my guest today, who is not just thinking about what happens today. It's not just thinking about what happens in the outside world, and he's involved with so much, but also what's happening on the inside as we move into the future. And so I want to introduce you to my new friend, Adipat Virdi, who is an award-nominated writer and immersive producer and has worked on various films, TV series, and immersive theater. Over the last 2 decades, Adipat has applied innovation thinking and knowledge to embed immersive strategy at the core of global organizations like, mom and pop shops like Meta or Charlotte Tilbury, or the BBC, Virgin Atlantic, HSBC, Coventry University, amongst a whole slew of others. And here, Adipat has helped to develop and evolve these immersive audience experiences and ecosystems by streamlining all these different business processes and metaverse architecture, not to mention virtual commerce and blueprints and blockchain mechanisms through these incredible story worlds and new intellectual property. He has positioned himself as a leading thinker in leveraging emerging tech for innovation frameworks for both social and commercial impact, and has been doing just a whole host of fascinating projects that I hope we'll dive into here today. They are way too many to count. But one of the most important things that I wanted to talk to Adipat about today too is thinking about empathy as a software for advocacy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. Adipat Virdi, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, no, thank you for inviting me. What an amazing introduction. I'm really happy to
start from the top. Adipat, I always ask all of my guests, how did you get here? How did you step into this crazy world of the metaverse? How did you get to this place?
Cool. So we'll get to the metaverse in a minute because it seems to
Mm.
be a bit of a byword. But my parents, I come from an Indian family, and my parents were like, architecture, medicine, or law. What would you
Right.
like to do with the rest of your life? And being a creative person at heart, I sort of went down the architecture route, which was cool. But in my heart, I'd always wanted to write and make films, and I always wanted to tell stories. So, in that lovely introduction, the word for me that matters is storyteller. That's in essence what I wanted to do. And so I did my architecture thing, did an MBA, so forth, blah, 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 to keep the parents happy. But I got to a point where I gave all that up, went back to uni, did a master's in screenwriting. But my careers have kind of dovetailed, whereby the storytelling is stuck. And through sort of interactive, transmedia, and now immersive, I wear two hats. There's like a strategic hat, and I love that stuff. You sort of helping people to think clearly about so forth and solving problems, but also the creative side, to actually put on the creative director hat and see some of these frameworks through. So that's kind of how I've got to where I am. So it's exciting. I get to be a storyteller and I get to play to my strengths. So it's been cool.
Fantastic. And so there's been an evolution. You were telling me initially about the project that you're working on now. Can you talk us a little bit about this project around honor killing? And
Sure.
for some of my listeners who don't know what that is, we have a big multicultural audience around the world. Tell us a little bit about the impetus for the project, how it started, and why you decided to take this on.
Sure. Okay. So it's a very personal project on a lot
Yeah.
of levels. And it actually started with an article in The Guardian. This is way back. We're going back about 15 years now, which was about an organization within MI6 called the Diplomatic Snatch Squad. And they go out and rescue back British nationals who've been kidnapped by their own families and are under the threat of death. And it absolutely blew my mind that here I am as an East African Indian growing up in the UK. And these are people who I see myself in. I recognize that this is my family background, as in culturally. And I didn't know that any of this stuff existed or happened. And I just really wanted to explore what is it about this that I find so fascinating? What is it that was really getting to me?
Mm.
And I think on a personal level, it's, growing up in a very patriarchal society, this disconnect between being a man in certain cultures and being a woman, why we have to even talk about things like equity blew my mind because I had a very nurturing relationship with my mum. And it's only when I started looking at it, I thought, God, there was a disparity here. So what can I do to tell that story? So using that as a frame, this notion of an honor crime, which just to explain and answer your question, there's this thing like an arranged marriage where your parents go, hey, would you like to marry that person? I'm being very reductive here. And you go, yeah, cool, I'll meet them and we'll see. To a forced marriage where it's like, you must marry this person. You don't have a choice. And go do it, please, for the family's sake. And there are lots of instances where young girls as young as 13 are being put in these situations. And as somebody who was once a 13-year-old, you have those impotences. You want to meet people, you want to explore, you want to find new ways of finding yourself, right? And these weren't being afforded. So these young girls were being seen out with somebody who was not from the same caste. And then family members would say, well, we don't want that. We're going to end your life. And that struck me that actually you're going to end somebody's life rather than just talk to them and try and figure out what's going on. And that's my understanding of an honor crime. This word honor, which has so much power, was being used to manipulate. Excuse me. So the
And
story,
maintain a social order, right? I mean, really fascinating. I mean, we work in innovation. This is probably the most extreme example of maintaining the status quo than one can imagine, right? We think about recalcitrant board members around a table who don't want to try, don't want to invest in our cool new prototype. But
yeah,
when you look at something as reductive as honor killings, it's a desire to keep society in a very specific container that cannot and will not move based on anyone's will. It is supported by some kind of spirituality. It is supported by the political structure. It's supported by all facets of the society to just keep it stagnant. Yeah.
absolutely. And that's so poignant what you say. For me, how do you drill down to the question? What's the question that we as a society, I'm just going to start that again, is what's that question that we as a society need to really answer in order to really understand what this means to us and grow as a community, as a world, and so forth. And here it was about this notion of truth, because it's what does the truth actually mean? How can I use something like a story to really start to understand what the truth is or could be, and actually try and initiate a dialogue so that people can have a common understanding? Because that's my belief. It's about cooperation, it's about compromise, it's about building trust, it's about having good intentions. And going back to the retreat you were on, it's like holding yourself to account and seeing the world from another person's point of view rather than just your own. And that's where the idea for this story world came up. Is yes, we have film. Like an example I always use is 12 Years a Slave, when that film came out. What a powerful film. There was a conversation around slavery in America that we were going to pinpoint. But if you look at the interest curve, which I charted with great interest, it was in all the socials. People were talking about it when the film came out. But then it completely died down. And then when the Oscars came up, conversation went up and it died down. But the question at the end of that is, well, what's the story actually doing? Is it fulfilling its purpose? Is it an art piece? Is it an installation? Is it something that is passive? Or does it have something that allows us to further the conversation, actually try and make a difference in the world? And for me, that's important. So the question was, how can I create something that actually builds advocacy? How can I build something that I can break that barrier between content and audience and allow us to really start to question what's going on relative to our own worldview and just inform one another's consciousness, I guess, to build a better world? So that's kind of where my storytelling process comes in.
Yeah. So when we take a look at some of your work, because you've really been at the cutting edge of this, of so many different movements when it comes to think about how we interact with the stuff we see on the web. And so you were telling me just before we started hitting record that you're going to be at Digital Fashion Week in London. Okay. Not the fashionista. I didn't know that a digital fashion week existed, but why the heck wouldn't it? I've been immersed in watching documentaries about 50 years of hip hop. And I was watching one last night on the fashion of hip hop and like all of that evolution and how that has invaded our pop culture. So tell us, as your mind is so amazing to me because it's around seeing things in dimensions that I don't think of things. Can you talk a little bit about spatial computing and how we begin to understand spatial computing?
So this is a great question. So one of the things to bear in mind, well, there's two things to bear in mind before we go to why fashion is a great industry to talk about when we talk about immersive, is when we talk about spatial computing. Apple were great when they introduced the Vision Pro, because they summarized this whole conversation around immersive and the metaverse
Wait,
in
what's
one.
the Vision Pro? I don't even know what that is.
So it's the new device that Apple are bringing out next year, which is like a mixed reality device. The idea being that you can sort of have a VR experience, you can have an AR experience, and it's furthering our understanding of how we use technology to augment the world that we're in, whether it's for work, entertainment, so forth, socializing, exercise, and so forth. And what spatial computing is saying is, or the core of what Apple were pitching, is that instead of looking at a computer, you will now be able to look through a computer. The idea being that we are going to move, and we already are in terms of the new generations that are coming up. We're not just going to be flicking through two-dimensional web pages. We're going to be scrolling through three-dimensional spaces, right? So it's a spatial construct that we're moving towards. And as part of that, the way we engage will have a spatial dimension. So when we talk about immersive, let's look at it like this. When you stare at a screen and when you have the arbiter of a screen between you and the content that you're looking at or engaging with, it's third person and it's passive because you're looking at it. There's a disconnect via the screen. But if you wrap a virtual world around you, that engagement becomes first person and it becomes participatory because your relationship to that content becomes central. And that is fundamental to the way in which new generations like Gen Z and Alphas are already starting to engage, right? So that's why this is really important. So when it comes to fashion, it's no longer about watch somebody else wearing a dress that you might be able to wear too in your size. It's about saying, can I try on this piece of fashion digitally? So can I scan my avatar? Can I look at myself in the mirror with this thing and experiment with how I feel, customization, talk to my friends about it, and then be able to engage with what this might look like in the real world? And underlying all of this is one fundamental shift. Up till now, what we have been doing, and a lot of corporates are doing this, is when we talk about marketing, we talk about inspiring our audience in order to make a purchase, right? So you set up an advertising campaign, a marketing campaign, you inspire, and then you make a purchase. But that's very short term. What we're evolving towards is an aspirational model. So to use Charlotte Tilbury, who are a makeup brand ostensibly, they do lots of other things. Very much they were about, well, we have products to make you look beautiful. So the work that I did with them was to say, well, if you were to position that as we're making products that make you feel beautiful, that is a whole another world of adding value and making it an aspirational construct rather than inspirational one. So what you do there is you add long-term value rather than just get short-term gain. And that's what I think is the fundamental shift and why immersive matters.
But if you play with your chakras a little bit more, you can move up this staircase, right? That is our energetic center, and you can look beautiful. That's lower. That's our lower body. We can feel beautiful, which is at our heart. And then the highest level, if you really wanted to get Charlotte Tilbury to a whole new plane, is to understand the essence of beauty in all of its forms, right? Even outside of my web-based two-dimensional body, three-dimensional body, I could get on all realms an understanding of beauty. You might want to take them to that next level, Adipat.
I would, if I may challenge that slightly,
Bring
I would
it,
say
yes.
what the work that you've suggested there needs to be done in order to then bring it back to feeling beautiful. Yes, you have to do that work, and yes, you have to consider those, but the shift from looking and feeling as we're talking about it, and this has got big business implications, right? Cultural and corporate implications here, is exactly to do that deep dive, because that unit of measurement here is not the human being, it's actually the human experience, right? And that's where I think what you've just said is really pertinent, because in order to make that shift, you have to go through that higher level work, but you've got to bring it back to yourself in the end. So and fundamental, I think, to where we need to move to.
I think that was like what was so revelatory about like the Dove beauty campaign, when we moved away from using models to using real people, and then going, oh, I have a different consciousness now about what beauty can be and where I see myself in that spectrum of beauty. Yeah. So this is amazing work. So can you get a little more, we've been talking in the esoteric for a little bit. So tell us a little bit about what this technology looks like and does. We think about the metaverse as 1,000 different things. I know I've talked about it on this show before. My son described to me the metaverse, he said, is a giant empty shopping mall. When we conceive about like storefronts or Martha Stewart living next to Snoop Dogg, or really high-end fashion brands making a play for getting your attention in the metaverse with VR or AR. But tell us how you see it, Adipat. What is the practical application of some of that, putting yourself into the dimensionality of the work?
Cool. Another good question. So everything you've said there is still relevant, right? So that empty shopping mall, we've started, we're at the beginning of this journey. So it's important to experiment. I think at the moment, just to answer, let's just get the metaverse question out of the way. It's an oligopoly, right? So it's owned by certain companies, which is cool because they're sort of innovating, they're pushing
They're funding.
And they're funding exactly and testing.
Like the railroads or what have you, when we were first getting our foundation done. Yeah.
So it's infrastructure, right? And so
Mm.
the idea being that at some point a civic institution needs to hack that, and it needs to become truly open source, like the World Wide Web, right? So we need to get to that place. But there are fundamental things that we are saying about what is the future of customer engagement, audience engagement, and so forth, which is that people want more choice, right? People want more personalized experience. People want more decentralized experiences, i.e., non-hierarchically controlled. We want more opinion. We want more community. We want to find our tribe. And what this is doing is giving you a space where you've got your real world and your digital world and your virtual world living together in symbiosis, right? So it's not about one or the other. We're not looking at a dystopian Ready Player One world. That's all fine, but that has a certain set of rules that lead to that. This is like the internet, but with a spatial dimension. That's all it is. So it just gives you more choice. So I think the opportunities here, as you said, are for that participatory nature. All we are doing is closing the gap between what we are saying and what someone is hearing, because the filter is getting closer and closer to who you are. So for instance, I'll give you an example. There's a particular tourism project that we did, and the idea there was, how do we get more people to think about or purchase tickets to go and be on a beach in Bali? And the assumptions that are made are very much about what already exists, which is, well, we need to transport them there, and we need to create this environment where they will sit on this beach virtually and then buy tickets. But that doesn't work. And the reason that doesn't work is because when we do the research and we look into it, what we find is that what people don't want is to suddenly go from their world and then be disrupted into, even though it's idealistic, into this world that doesn't feel real. They need it to be in stages. So we found that people wanted to get dressed up and in VR, go to a limousine, travel to the airport in a first class seat, sipping their champagne, get on the plane, sit in first class again, and have that experience before they land and arrive at their destination. So that longitudinal engagement, which you can afford an audience, is what allowed the numbers to go up in terms of who was saying, I now want to experience this in the real world. So those kind of lessons are really important. And if I could share another example at
Hey,
the
can I
BBC.
just hang out here for just a heartbeat?
Sure.
Having just come from an airport, I think that avoiding the airport and putting myself on the beach, intuitively, it feels like it's the right thing to do. But you know, this is an endless reminder to me, and I hope it is to you, audience, as well, that no one is craving disruption. No one is desiring this giant shakeup of systems or even of imagination in a way that we conceive of it. That the way that all of us do this, and it's a very refined and well-tested technique in storytelling, is called breadcrumbing, where we look back to the past and we say, how did we get here? How has it always been done? To prove to myself that I can take the next right step into an unknown future. So I look backwards and I say, wow, look at all the cool things I've done, the money invested, the time spent. And then I look forward as a storyteller and say, and let me tell you what heaven looks like, Fiji. But the next right step is a step into the limousine,
Yeah,
with the champagne, with the pampering, with the here's my ideal Fiji experience. But it starts in slow bites,
exactly.
right? We're not swallowing the whale. We're taking tiny little bites along the way that makes that giant vision actually credible and believable in our mind. Otherwise, we can't get there. We can't
Yeah.
jump over all the other steps in the hope of just showing them paradise. It does not work.
No. And this is a clear example and a test of the fact that aspiration happens in arithmetic progression. In order to create aspiration, which gives you long-term value, and as a byproduct, you will make money. But if you go for an inspirational model, which has to happen exponentially, you will create value, but it will be short-term, and you will lose the long-term value, integration with your brand and your core brand values. And that's where we're heading. It's all about the audience. It's all about keeping the community. Branding is about community.
And so fascinating, because what you're saying is that the aspirational, definitely you need it, but you had better put out the breadcrumbs to get there. But as our technology evolves and we understand things faster, in theory, we'll need fewer breadcrumbs.
I personally don't agree with that, because I think that as technology progresses, all it's doing, because at the moment with technology, you have to do a few side steps in order to understand the technology, sort of incorporate that into your sort of psyche about how it works, and then sort of assemble it in order to get to the next breadcrumb. All the technology is going to do is make it far more seamless for you to get from one step to the next. I don't think you will ever need less breadcrumbs. In fact, I think you'll get to a point where there will be more breadcrumbs, because in the words of whoever the philosopher was, it's about the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
And that's where this is.
It's funny because while we're talking, my mom is 95 and going and teaching her how to use the ATM. This does not feel like an aspirational goal for me. It sounds like something that requires alcohol after, but I realize that she needs the breadcrumbs in order to get there. But I think about, for me, going from an ATM to online banking might require fewer breadcrumbs because I can already envision what it looks like. Right. But that's not a breakthrough anymore.
No, and a good way to sort of just ground what we're talking about here is the BBC. I did this thing for the BBC, which was around the Syrian refugee experience. And it was
Wow.
BBC Arabic. And it's like, well, what is the Syrian refugee experience? How do we get that into people's psyche and get them to understand who people are? And I always use this example that 9/11, for instance, abhorrent, wrong, awful. But why has nobody asked the question of, well, who were these people? What promoted their ideology that got them to do what they did? Who were they as human beings? That shades of grey bit seems to be missing, because whenever it comes to events like that, we turn into binary judges. So it's all about right and wrong, right? And that, I think, is very disastrous. And I think it's how it's proving out in the sort of political machinations that we're seeing today. So with this Syrian refugee thing, it was like, okay, cool, but let's create something. And what we created ended up being a very sort of distilled branching narrative. And so we got loads and loads of hits because it's BBC Arabic and BBC and so forth. But no one was really going back or engaging or commenting and so forth. And then the idea was this: we had these interviews, right? There was loads of interviews. And one of them, for instance, was this guy who his mum gave him a pair of shoes and said, listen, I know you're about to leave and I'm going to miss you. I'm too old to come with you. Take these shoes because I don't want your feet to get hurt. I want you to not have blisters. It was really heartrending. And he decided, I'm not going to wear them. I'll wear them when I have got to freedom. And the interview was mind-blowing. So it made us think of this thing. And I like to call this, it's like a radical question, right? It's like a sort of a question that you ask, which is right at the core of the problem you're trying to solve. And the question was, what is the one thing you would not leave behind if your whole world was falling apart around you? Now, immediately, we have taken the essence of the Syrian refugee experience and turned it into something that you and I, who are sitting in our comfortable homes, wherever we are, can relate to, because I can answer that question for myself and I
What
can
is
have
it?
an emotional response. It's this, and I can explain the story behind that. It's very personal. My mum gave it to me and so forth.
It's a
But
bracelet, a bangle.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's called a kara. It's got sort of religious and cultural meaning as a Sikh. But the point being that suddenly people were going back to the experience and there was more engagement. So the line of engagement was more sort of flatter because we had given them a way in to relate something that was not in their world to something that was in their world.
Mhm.
And in industry, in all the sort of corporate work that I've done, it's that kind of pivoting of brand DNA and thinking about your brand DNA that has made the most difference in terms of turning organizations to be more future ready.
So can we, this is such an incredible discussion, because as innovators, we're tasked with kind of being in the doing. It's not to say there isn't incredible design thinking work that goes in and a lot of strategic work that goes into doing this, but I don't know if we often take the time to do kind of the soul work around innovation. And perhaps you can help us think about some of these questions, especially some of my favorite guests have been in Fortune 500 manufacturing companies or in really sophisticated tech companies, 3M, Adobe, Corning, NASA, like thinking about these really huge companies. How do we get back to that soul on the innovation front?
For me, it's about asking the right questions because,
Yeah.
at the end of this, a lot of the innovation work that I've experienced, and it's a culture thing as well, right? So you go into big organizations, and there is very much a stipulation about it's very Plato's cave, right? It's like, well, yes, we want to innovate, but this is how we want to do it. So it's very much like the decision I was given, right? It's the choice of architecture, medicine, or law. So there's no opportunity to think for myself. And I feel that the same is true when we talk about innovation, especially when it's future facing innovation, when we're doing any kind of futures thinking. But the trick there is it's about, let's use uncoupling the culture from the sort of drivers, the business drivers, and actually saying, well, let's just revisit what the culture is. What is it that we're trying to achieve from a human perspective? What is that relationship between content, consumer, and brand in whatever company you're in? And what is it that you're trying to solve for your audience? What is that real question? That's where the soul work comes out, because we're calling it soul work and it sounds all esoteric and so forth. But that's where the gold is strategically. And especially as we move forward, because there are no clear frameworks, because we're not dealing with a linear progression. We're dealing with an ecology, an ecosystem. We've got to understand what boundaries that ecosystem has, right? And that's what then evolves the right way to innovate, in my view. And to ground that a little bit with a sports brand that we were working with, rather than just selling product, what they did was it was like trainers. We looked at a collaboration studio. So how do we collaborate? What does that mean? So we worked with designers, real world famous designers. And so therefore everyone got this essence of, well, this isn't a product that I wear on my feet. This is an extension of myself. So therefore there were like galleries where people were actually showcasing these trainers they designed or helped to design to show their friends, rather than, oh yeah, it's something I wear on my feet and I'm going to buy another one in 6 months or whatever it is. And I think
Mhm.
that is the shift. That's what I call the soul work.
And some brands are really good at doing that, right? And others don't take the time. They seem to do just fine. What are they missing if they don't do that work?
So I think where we are now with immersive, because immersive is not a buzzword, it's not Betamax, right? It's not this thing that's going to come and pop away. What we're talking about is a genuine evolution of the way in which consumers, audiences engage with content experiences or with products. It means that there's a fundamental shift where you really have to pivot the way in which you think about that equation, as I said, between content, consumer, and brand. And I
Mm.
think if we continue the way we are, that's fine. That we will achieve what we need to achieve. But I think in the sort of medium term, we're going to lose out on really harnessing these new generations who are the next generation with disposable income, your Gen Zs and Alphas. They fundamentally think differently about the way in which they engage. So if we don't understand that and build that into the brand DNA, I think we're going to miss out.
Is that what we're calling the generation after Gen Z
Alphas,
is
yeah.
alphas?
Yeah, alphas. Yeah. So my 3-year-old and 6-year-old would be the alphas. So yeah.
I hope you're effectively marketing to them as we speak.
Yes, exactly. Oh no, they can only do architecture, medicine, all of that.
Right. I mean, like you hear it coming out of your mouth today and you go, oh, but it's such an interesting discussion, Adipat, because when we think about the values that undergird, whether it's honor killings or whether it's our parents' desire for us to do something and be successful, it is a quest for security, right? It is a quest for the tangible of the thing that makes us feel comfortable of what we know versus what we don't know. I still remember when I came home and told my father that I was going to be an anthropology major. We were sitting at the kitchen table and he said, 1 minute. And we had a Webster's dictionary that was about that fat. And he went to the dictionary to look up the definition. took out one of his business cards and wrote the definition on the back of his card. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I know my customers are going to ask me what you're studying at school, and I want to be able to tell them the right thing because I don't know what that is."
That's
And
amazing.
so, and to be honest, I got to college. I had never heard of anthropology. I didn't know what it was, but I fell in love with it. And so we have to give our forefathers and mothers a little bit of grace if they are willing to step into, and for all of us, right, to step into the unknown and say, "I'm willing to learn." Yeah.
I think that's such a powerful point. It's about that willingness to know that we don't know everything. And it's also a willingness to accept that difference is okay. It's okay to be different. And it's
Yeah.
okay to have other aspirations.
And I think it's one of the joys of parenting, if you can stomach it, is not being in the right all the time. I have a low threshold for that, but I'm trying to learn from my kids.
Yeah.
But, and it's effective as innovators too, is I always enjoy having reverse mentors. So people who are much younger in their 20s who can teach me things that my friends are not talking about, that are not interacting. I mean, not also to stay current on the vernacular and the slang of the day, because you don't want to look like you have no idea what your kids are talking about.
Absolutely. I've gone from dada to daddy to bruh. Yeah, and my 3-year-old the other day, we went out for a walk and there was this sort of little farmland thing. And I said, "Oh, look, it's a tractor." And he goes, "Daddy," this is my 3-year-old, "that's a backhoe." And I was like, okay, educated. I feel educated. So it was wonderful.
Okay, as a New Yorker, that your child knows farming equipment, she's already surpassed my knowing. So I'm intrigued.
It's amazing. Yeah, you learn so much. You're absolutely right. I love that notion of reverse mentoring. That's great.
So give us some advice, Adipat. You are living in this world every day, spatial computing, the metaverse, Web3, all of this stuff. And these sound like a lot of buzzwords, but they really, if they are not impacting the underlying technologies of what's going on, they are certainly bubbling up into our vernacular and how we think about it. Give me and my audience some advice on how we should think about spatial computing, perhaps in a way. What should we be doing now, thinking now? What's your advice to us?
So I think we've talked, let me summarize. There's a few things that have come up in the talk that we've had. I think the important stuff is that we need to not stop, but we need to sort of evolve from thinking about inspiring our audience to making whatever we do aspirational for them.
Yes. Okay.
I think the second thing is that it's not about static and linear engagement. It's about dynamic and participatory, because the way in which we experience things is no longer linear and one directional. It's about an open ecology within which, at most, we can hope to create touch points of experiences and hope that we build that engagement and community. And third is making money will always be there, but we need to see it as a byproduct of adding value. Otherwise, this will not be a long-term proposition. And one last thing is on the tech is not here to take over what we can do. That human agency will always be there. We will always need that input. The tech is here to facilitate and eradicate the obstacles between us and the experiences that we are delivering. So I think all of that coupled together is a good high level place to just start thinking about how you can pivot your core brand DNA to be immersive ready.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you my 3 hot seat questions. What is the greatest innovation of all time?
Wow. The camera obscura. That blew my mind when that came out. So in art, it was the first thing that was fully allowed me to live in another world. When I first saw that, it was just phenomenal. So camera obscura.
Wow. Wow. That is the first answer on the show, camera obscura. So thank you. If you could join any innovation team in history, which one would you join?
Wow, that's a great question. The Personally, I want to join the team that came up with the idea for Back to the Future. I want to be part of that creative process.
The Hollywood team.
Yeah, the Hollywood team, to just literally build those kind of amazing 80s films that I grew up on and loved. I just don't think there's stories like that anymore.
That is aspirational, if I
Yeah,
ever.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, good point. Okay. And if you had the opportunity to invent something or innovate something that either would make you so happy or that would stop driving you absolutely insane, what would that be?
Is a way to make children sleep through the night from when they are 1 month old. Because my 6-year-old has only just started sleeping through the night. I want to invent something that allows parents to translate the absolute horror of non-sleeping children at that age into a joy. I think that is the future.
Oh my God. I can hear 1,000 sleepy parents just exhaling in my ear at the moment, just going, yes, please. That is so great. I'm recalling comedian George Lopez, who'd say that his grandmother used to give him before bedtime a glass of sleepy juice, which was Kool-Aid with Benadryl in it. That was his sleepy juice. He slept through the night every night.
Amazing. A friend of mine suggested whiskey on the gums, but
On the
I haven't
gums.
got that desperate yet. Yeah.
Yeah, an old Irish remedy for sure. For it's not a remedy for insomniac children. It's a recipe for frustrated parents.
Tell me about it. Yeah, I know, because they have to drink the rest of the bottle to get to that point.
That's right. They're going to pass out regardless.
Exactly.
The question is, will they be interrupted?
Exactly.
Adipat Virdi, if people want to get in touch with you and learn more about your amazing work, the future of all things spatial computing, tourism, and beautiful branding experiences, where can they meet you?
LinkedIn is a good place. I sort of spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So please, yeah, look me up on LinkedIn and let's have a great conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining me on the show today, Adipat. It was awesome having this conversation with you.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Terrific.